just to introduce myself, so I'm Claire Poole. I am the principal of ClearBright Consulting, a small agency focused around external communications and events organising, entirely focused on sustainability, climate change and sport. And I'm also the founder of the Sport Positive Summit, which is a globally attended summit hosted by me in association with UNFCCC and the International Olympic Committee. And it's the meeting place for sports and sustainability climate change initiatives. So that's me. So David, if I could ask you to move the slide on, sorry to ask you to do that as we go along. I thought it'd be helpful just in terms of a lot of you on the call might be climate change experts, and this is like going back to primary school for you. But for anyone who isn't sort of massively au fait with the COP and you hear these things bandied around a lot, I thought it's just helpful to frame this out in terms of what the COP actually is and why it's so important. So basically, UNFCCC is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the COP is basically the decision-making body of that convention. So it's the place where the 196 nations come together and basically make decisions around what our climate change efforts are at a national and international level. I'm sure you all know about the landmark 2015 Paris Agreement, where all of those nations came together to say that we're going to commit to hold global heating to no more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So we've all agreed as a world that we're going to make sure that the temperature doesn't increase by more than 2 degrees from what it was before the Industrial Revolution. And the reason the COP's such a big deal is that everyone has an equal seat at the table. So unlike some parts of the other areas of the global economy where larger economies of the world have much more pull, for any decisions to be made at the COP, every single country has the same seat at the table, from the small island developing states all the way up to the largest economies in the world. So that's just a bit of background on what we're actually talking about. So on the next slide, David, if you don't mind, just what the UK's position is. We're all here in terms of being based in the UK. So the UK actually enacted the Climate Change Act in 2008, 7 years ahead of the Paris Agreement. At that stage, we committed to long-term target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by the year 2050 relative to 1990 levels, but it's since been updated to say we'll reduce by at least 100% relative to 1990 levels. And again, this keeps the UK on track in terms of its global position and our seat at the table of COP26. As Susie mentioned, COP26 is a massive deal. It's being hosted in the UK, but it also marks 5 years since the Paris Agreement, and it's now a time where essentially there's need for progress beyond the commitments within the Paris Agreement, that we need immediate action on the climate emergency, and it's a big year in terms of that impetus. So that's why we're so important, and this meeting so important. It's been moved to next year. So we're talking about 2 degrees Celsius all the time. You probably hear it all the time. Stop warming above 2 degrees Celsius. But some parties think this isn't enough to actually save some of the ecosystems of the world. So on the next slide, David, if you don't mind, I just thought it's helpful. This is a slide from WWF that they put together a couple of years ago in terms of the climate risks. So the difference between a 1.5 degree and a 2 degree scenario. Whilst we've all agreed to 2 degrees, you can see on this slide the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees global warming could be the difference between us losing 70% of our coral reefs versus 100 in terms of bleaching. It can be the difference between 9% of the world's population being exposed to extreme heat waves, moving up to 28% of the world's population. So whilst 2 degrees is our focus, we obviously want to do more, and 1.5 would be optimal if we can make it happen, and that's why there's so much collaboration and so much work to try and stop the warming going certainly above 2 degrees, but ideally 1.5. So in terms of the next slide, David, I just wanted to highlight what regions can do to help and how they can benefit. Obviously, we're here to talk about Future South and all of you in the south of England, and how actually getting behind this can help the national and the global effort, but also benefit you as a community. So obviously coming together as a region and getting behind this work is going to support the national targets that we've got in place at a regional level. Also, by coming together in this way, you can connect the dots within your local communities on the climate change initiatives. Of course, we focus on climate change, but the heating of the planet and the impacts of climate change are impacting public health, they're impacting the economy, and the sustainability and resilience of our local communities and our local economies, and the health of us and our kids and our grandkids, etc. So again, by working in a more regional way, you can connect the dots in a lot of these issues in a more holistic way that benefits multiple different facets of this effort. And obviously by doing it in this way, you can leverage these really relevant regional partnerships. So working together with your efforts, it doesn't just help your organisation, but you can partner with similar organisations to be able to drive that effort forward. So lastly on this, just on the next slide, David, another way that the region could look to get involved in a more global way is by committing to Race to Zero. So this is a campaign that was launched by the UN the beginning of June. It's led by our high-level champion for climate for COP26, Nigel Topping. And essentially this is a global campaign to rally this leadership around inclusive and sustainable growth. So build back better, recover better, etc. All the things that we're talking about post-COVID. That encapsulated also with the COP26 effort. So you can see there, this is a screenshot of a couple of weeks ago. Businesses, cities, investors, 21 regions, which is obviously particularly relevant to you all on the call, and universities as well. So the organisations that have committed so far cover 25% of all of our global CO2 emissions and over 50% of our gross domestic profit as a planet. And they're continuing to bring new people into this effort all the time. The objective essentially of joining the effort is to help build this momentum around a shift to a decarbonised economy ahead of COP26 and continue to reach the Paris goals and reach beyond that. So these are some ways that the South could benefit from getting behind this effort, both locally and of course globally. And Susie kind of wanted me just to touch on some work we've done at the UN in the Sports for Climate Action framework, because it might give food for thought for a way in which the South could build a framework that works for you all. So David, just my last slide, if you wouldn't mind advancing that, I'll just touch on this briefly. I was fortunate to be one of the people who got the UN Sports for Climate Action framework off the ground by convening the initial meeting of global stakeholders back in October 2017. The idea was born ahead of that, but what we did in that initial stakeholder meeting over 2 days was scope out the appetite for organisations to get involved, what their challenges were, what the opportunities were of coming together in this way, etc. By doing that scoping process, we were able then to put together a framework around 5 principles that all of these sports organisations could agree to and commit to. And we launched it just over a year later at COP24 in Katowice, had about 25-30 founding signatories based around these 5 principles of action. In terms of organisations sign up to that framework, and then we have ongoing working groups around certain areas that are particularly relevant: communication, education, advocacy, sustainable production and consumption, driving climate change awareness, etc. So groups sign up, individuals and organisations sign up to those working groups and help advance that work. We're up to 140 global signatories now across massive organisations like FIFA, UEFA, the NBA, the Yankees, etc. And I've also highlighted the UK organisations that are signatories: the FA, SailGP, obviously through Susie, Wimbledon, Sky Sports, Loughborough University, etc. So essentially, and then we're all convening in October at my summit, the Sport Positive Summit, again to raise awareness and advance this effort. So I know, again, you all on the call aren't necessarily sports people, but I just wanted to highlight that in terms of, if there was an appetite for this in your community, the way in which we could kind of move it forward in terms of making it work for everyone. So hopefully that's a bit of a flavour to get us started off. Thanks again for having me, and obviously I'm here for any questions and discussion later on. Thanks a million.